think we'll ever be the master of AI. Huge elephant in the room that we have to think about. But the everyday people, like, they're not coming at it at that point. And this is almost like, in some ways, we only have so much bandwidth, myself included, that I'm like, that's not the soar I'm pushing people on, because that doesn't necessarily get people going. But I think we could actually put together a pretty interesting case study around that, just seeing when people are attacked, how much does it cost to actually fix? What is the actual issues downstream, your reputation, and just the fear of anything that hurts your annual recurring revenue? That's really scary business, right? Like,
absolutely. Okay, first of all, you mentioned last time that you were doing this podcast that was driving people through how we used not necessarily AI, but digital from the absolute beginning of it to today.
So I've been working with Plutus 21, which is both an investment firm and a development firm. Essentially, they have a podcast where I have almost assumed the co-host role at this point. We've done 4 recordings so far, and we're breaking down how business owners can start understanding how to use AI. We move through the cycles of unawareness, people not knowing what they can do, to figuring out what they can do, what's good for them, how do they execute upon it, and then go through the flywheel again. How do we recalibrate, and so forth? So it's bringing people from unawareness to execution, essentially. And with the folks that I've been working with are business owners, decision makers at small to medium-sized enterprises, and essentially helping them see the full roadmap of where AI can fit and where it can't. Some of the questions that are really important to ask regarding that is, first off, what's AI good at, and what are humans good at? So there's the two sides of that conversation, and then there's almost like the cyborg. So the AI and a human, and how do you collaborate together? So there's different spots within a business. The other thing that's really interesting, but I think that we have to make sure that we understand, are maybe there's some things that AI does really well, but we love doing. We don't want to take those away from us, because then we take away the parts of our work that bring us joy. What I have been doing is taking a bit of a different lens into this whole AI framework or landscape that we're evolving with, and looking at the values that we have as people, because we need to understand ourselves better to get the most out of AI, because it is like a conversation. How everyone's been talking about prompt engineering and getting as good as you can and having a specific framework, and that's good to learn critical thinking and how to push something in. But you'd be surprised if you use ChatGPT, just like me and you speaking at the bar last week, and you click the little record button and you just start talking to it.
Something that I think somehow fail to understand is that people will assume they don't know how it works spontaneously, because either it's new or we consider it as artificial intelligence. And some people will spontaneously say, for example, it writes like crap, so I cannot use it because it doesn't do a good job. And what I tell them in those situations is, of course it doesn't write correctly, because it's your job to train it. The same way a kid cannot read if you haven't trained him or taught him how to do so. It's very much that dialogue that you need to have with that new agent in your business and figure out how to make that synergy work. So it makes perfect sense.
You'd be surprised how human-like it actually is, right? All the information that's gone through these language models is the beautiful creations that we as humans have put out into the world. That's what it's learned on. So it's biased us right off the bat. Speaking to it like a human, but understanding that it might not be right all the time is something really helpful.
Okay, I want to talk more about the fact that, so you mentioned that you're taking it in a different way, saying it's about who we are as humans and the values that we have, and how we basically use AI to project it even more, but from that very core element of we are humans and we have values, and it's not about roboticizing, if it's even a word, our values, so to speak. So can you give me more about this? What do you mean? How does it apply concrete, like exactly?
So as you've heard the term before, garbage in, garbage out. If you write a garbage prompt, you're going to get garbage coming out, and then you're going to say it sucks. So the reason why I share this is because there's two things to really think about, there's more than two. Let's start with two to make it simple. How you craft what you want out of these language models, and then how you craft the output that you want out of these language models. With AI right now, a lot of people ask, hey, what's a great use case for my business? If we look at the numbers, there are use cases that are running rampant through different industries. But the thing is, every business, if we look at them, they're all different. So if we're going to push use cases onto your business, we have to think about what are the values that you have yourself. Do you want to get home in time to be able to have enough energy to play with your kids, do homework, put them to bed? Or do you want to be able to make as much as you can so you can retire at the age of 40? These are two very different values that we have to almost build AI or work with AI to get the most out of it. So when I say that is, what are your priorities? And this is one of the challenges that I see is in companies that have many decision makers. First off, there's the priorities that a company has on paper. There's the priorities that are unspoken that the management knows, and people, us as humans, know the nuance and the context, but AI will never be able to help put that out until it's written. So that's doing a bit more of an audit check on what are the actual values in your company that need to be considered and then written down, and then train the model to actually input and output. So I know you asked about us as people values. For me, I love what I do right now. I guess I've termed myself as an AI concierge or AI matchmaker, because there are times in your business where you need to develop something unique for your business case, but there are times in your business that you need to just find a tool that's already out there, because why are you going to throw dollars on something on the wheel that's already been created? So when I come back to values, the reason why I say that is the amount of different variation of output that language models can do is based so much on what you ask for it and from it. So we have to think about, I think I'm going too deep into the business values of the company, because that's what succinctly makes sense for me, what flows through. Because if we state that we're a company that's direct, professional, getting to the point, if you state that in your language, your prompt engineering output and what you key into the chat bot, it will give you that. But you have to think about, it's just because my mind jumps into all the segmentations of your audience afterwards, because you have to align what your values are with the values of the audience.
Because what I was thinking when you were talking about this was, it is about what you want to be reflected from your business in your output. So these need to be put forward, but also you basically have one chat per action, per things you expect, or per audience you're talking to, or per type of content. So sometimes you will need a value that is going to be completely business and super performance oriented and extremely rational on one of the chats, because it's part of the entirety of your company and it's going to answer to a specific goal, like a business goal that you have in order to achieve it, to move forward with that strategy specific to this. But on the other hand, you may have to create social content, for example, where you need a lot more identification, creating of a relationship, where it's mostly going to be about the people in, the fact that we're all in it together, that we create relationship within and out. And in that specific case, it's going to be a different goal, so it's going to be a different value put forward. But the thing that people sometimes fail to understand is that they're going to take ChatGPT as a pot pourri in French, a garbage can where they can throw everything, and some magical algorithm is going to sort it and give them exactly what they need when they need it. The thing is, it is still not it's not a human mind. I think they forget that it's the same thing as if you were talking to a entry-level professional. Exactly. And they're going to do the best job possible if you take them by the hand and you show them exactly what you need. And that's the best thing. It's the best way to train a model to understand exactly what you need and what you want, because we call it intelligence. It's not. It's loops and algorithms. So yes, it will learn, but it's still not a brain in itself. So you cannot expect that from it. I think it's what you were trying to explain.
Yes. Because my mind jumps out to all the different values that we want to have, either implicit or explicit. What are we working on? And one of the things that I have created that makes it a bit easier, I'm sure that there's a flywheel that works like this in so many different domains, but I've called it the co-evolution framework. So it's 4 stages. And just to give you a bit more context towards what you were referring to. So there's discover, attunement, integration, and recalibration. What you were just referring to is the output of, let's say, something that runs the organization. It hits a goal. It has to be exact. It needs to not hallucinate. You need to have more guardrails. So you need to have, in the implementation stage, in that integration stage, you have to be more exacting and more precise with what you do. So there's something called temperature, and temperature up and temperature down with these language models is how creative are you going to allow the responses be, or how refined to the model that it's trained. So thinking about things at the integration stage, it needs to be exact. It needs to be on point. It needs to be within the guardrails that your company has taught it to be. But when you're looking at the discovery stage, that first stage, this is the ideation stage. This is all the stuff I don't know about a different domain, a different specialty. And in there, creativity is key, right? That's a space that we want to ideate on so many different things because we don't know which pathway is the best one yet. And that's why when we work with business owners, we have to go through these stages because we have to be literally out of the box. Then we have to zone in into what makes sense to us because we've actually figured out our values. Then we actually need to do something. So you have to put all the rules, the protocols, how your business operates. When you speak to a person that doesn't know you versus a person that's coming back to your webpage again.
That's the strategic. Yeah, that's the strategic phase. Basically, it's how do I plan for this goal to be achieved and this AI to start functioning as an agent within my company.
Exactly. So that is a very different stage of what are all the different ways that AI hasn't even, we haven't even figured out all the ways that AI can help us yet, right? That's in that ideation stage that we have to go through and allow it to be a free thinker, allow it to go crazy, allow it to,
absolutely.
Because maybe you'll get 19 out of the 20 outputs that it gives you that are but that last one gave you inspiration because the beauty of this, it's all co-evolution, right? It's what does the AI build and then what do we know from our world that we can then build upon it? And as you were saying before, these AI models are like an intern. They will listen exactly to the point that you state, even if it's nonsense, right? If that line is just, send it to our whole communication base in our CRM, and you're like, no, that line wasn't supposed to be there, and it does it, right? So it's just
absolutely
thinking what frame of lens and what is the thing that you want out of it, right? To make it a bit more palatable in how these models are being built, and there's different ones like Claude I find is extremely impressive on building something at the same time as when I'm working with it, right? These templates that are being out, these dashboards that are being built out. But if you were to train your own model, let's say, and you made it very clear that specifically what dimensions let's say the carousels on LinkedIn are versus the reels on Instagram or Facebook and so forth. And then what are the specific audience members that click? And then what is the message or what part of the sales funnel are they going in? Are they going into the awareness or do you want There's all the different steps that we have to think about. What are all the different lenses that us as business owners, as entrepreneurs need to put on to get the most out of this? But the thing is, so many people have been working so hard to make ends meet. I believe that it's working in the business versus on the business, right?
Yes. That's such a debate.
It's focused on the time, not too focused. They don't have enough time to take 5 steps back to look at their whole situation because they just have to keep going, right? They got to keep hitting their goals for the next quarter and not
I think that's why technically we were mentioning last time we chatted that idea of a middleman or an outside human agent necessary in order to do that work of the de-zooming and looking critically at every step and saying, what are your goals? how can AI be implemented in a strategic way to achieve those better without forgetting all of the human factor that you have within the company or with your clients, but to just fine tune, not in the LLM like meaning,
Yeah,
but like just
in our brain space,
exactly.
right?
So can you tell me more about this? Because that's basically what you're doing right now for businesses. So what is it? How does it materialize? Like, how does it work for the business, for you, for the AI people? Like,
I would actually take it a step further, right? I
okay,
do think that it's really important for us to reflect upon our goals and to decide our goals. But one of the things that I feel that we almost forget is that, okay, I've worked in different jobs. I've worked as a wholesaler at a wealth management, at an asset management firm. So essentially offering different funds to portfolio managers, advisors, and so forth. And there are trainers and there's best practice guides, right? There's what are the best paths to success that are already written and out there. So one of the things you had mentioned is asking a business owner what are their goals. Sure, that's really important. And I do think that needs to be focused on at one stage. But the other thing is we can take the mental load off of these folks also by thinking about what industry they're in, what are some parallel jobs that are very similar that they do, and then finally asking, out of all the successful portfolio managers that are there, out of all the successful wealth advisors that are out there, what is it that they're doing? What are the goals? What are the outcomes of success that they are doing? And then being able to feed those outcomes to someone, let's say green, right? Like completely new in the industry, and saying, did you know that these different outcomes are ones that really successful advisors are striving for and do well in? It's like it's already future tested, and you're like, oh, so the roadmap is already really clear. So what I do specifically with companies right now is understand the whole schematic of their company. I look at it from their systems that they have, who are the people in the firm, what is the culture of adoption, what do we have to shift, what are the resources that you have, what is the acumen that you have regarding business or tech, and tech both, because they're both really important, and people also, because you got to manage people. What are the regulatory and security considerations you have to use? I think there's a lot of people out there that are afraid to use AI because they don't know which parts of their data sets they can actually put into a language model without getting in trouble.
That's something that freaks people out. I have a lot of people around me who will refuse to just play with it because they're going to be super worried that on a cybersecurity front, there are leaks everywhere. And it is true that it is not truly use ChatGPT, use Claude, and it's probably deep somewhere on their like confidentiality policy. But it's not said clearly what is considered. If I give my groundbreaking idea to discuss it with ChatGPT and have a brainstorming session, how much of this could be used by that model in a different chat with a different person? And that is something that is a main concern that I've seen. But I think it's also, if I just pull the thread a little bit longer, it goes with that general worry about cybersecurity today, because people still think that it is not something they need to worry about today. I was talking about it with so many people because they're like, yeah, it happens, but I don't have that many assets, or I don't generate that much like revenue, so I'm not concerned by it. This is not about me. The thing is, I think it's across the scope something we need to consider because of deepfake, because of everything. It's just AI has a way to push up all of the things that we refuse to see, because it can just basically push everything up and say, okay, if we max out everything that we refuse to take into consideration so far regarding tech, what happens? And I think this is what worries people a little bit. I'm sorry I cut you, but it was part of the conversation.
I agree, and people want to hear what people are going through, right? If these are conversations that people are having, it is extremely important to have them here in a space that people can actually listen and be like, shoot, it's not just me. We got to get through this together. Yeah. And you are completely on point. And I find it almost scary. I have a couple of friends that are like in the higher IT space, in just security and network configurations, and just they go into companies and so many are just not on side from a security standpoint. And it's really scary because they're only going to take action once an attack happens. And it's
too late.
You know how much
The data is
it's
out.
almost like we should do a balance of how much money would they have to actually spend to resolve and do it really quickly versus right now and having a long-term plan. But again, it's about working in the business, on the business. People don't have time to look at these things right now. It doesn't impact them right now.
Absolutely.
So,
that's what I was going to say. So it doesn't get into that conversation of how much budget are we going to put on this, because this is not a right now. This is not something that's going to like generate revenue immediately. It's not. It could afterward, because it's a point that you can make to people saying your data is going to be safe. But more on this, I think it's also that people still have that idea that cybersecurity attack is about pulling your data out. But I was talking about it with an AI specialist about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he looked at me and he said, but Jad, this is not how it's happening anymore. The cybersecurity attacks are about putting one tiny thing in that changes and basically fucks up the entire set of data you have inside, so you don't know what's true anymore. So your entire set of data is wrong, and it can change the name, and it's true for like private businesses, but it can be true for defense businesses as well, which turns this into a very big rabbit hole of terror, honestly, because you don't know where it stops. So I think it's absolutely not there for so many businesses, but it's a question that they need to ask themselves with using AI, clearly.
Definitely. And AI has an amplifier effect, right? It's like adding leverage to something. So whatever the good, whatever the bad, it's just going to amplify it. And the fact that it can contaminate an entire data set and you can't see the audit trail of how it went about. It's just think about all the development dollars that you put into creating, let's say, your data warehouses and your data lake and your everything that you tied together. And now it's actually all contaminated in a way that you've never had it contaminated before and you don't know how to fix it. And so there is that. By all means, that's a huge elephant in the room that we have to think about. But the everyday people, like, they're not coming at it at that point. And this is almost like, some ways we only have so much bandwidth, myself included, that I'm like, that's not the soar I'm pushing people on, because that doesn't necessarily get people going. But I think we could actually put together a pretty interesting case study around that, just seeing when people are attacked, how much does it cost to actually fix, what is the actual issues downstream, your reputation, and just the fear of anything that hurts your annual recurring revenue. That's really scary business, right? Like,
absolutely, because it can be your downfall, literally. It could be the point of no return where you cannot build back because you have no prior. Like when you save, like what data you saved is wrong. But in order to roll back, since we were very futuristic, which is super interesting, but I think it's also about humanity has been evolving. Okay, I'm taking a very historical point of view here, but bear with me. So humanity has been always creating things that were scary until we understood it perfectly, and we used it to do very cool things. But it always, every progress has a downside, but it's not a reason not to do the progress in question. And I think that's something, because the more you use it, the more you understand what not to do, what to do, and how to protect yourself. But until you jump at it, you cannot know. And I think we are at that stage where people are starting to use it more, which allows us to understand this better. But it's also, you always jump with a sort of safety jacket on or something, at least in your head. And that's the point of having critical mind and everything.
I couldn't agree more. But right, that's me and you that like dabbling with new things, right? Novelty is our thing, and just throwing ourselves in. Literally the thing I start with, folks, right? Like, as much as we can jump into specific use cases around AI in your business, if you haven't used it to create a recipe, create a planner for your day, why one of the lights on your dashboard on your car is blinking. Like, this is all written on Reddit. It's all written on Quora. It's all written in different places on the web that AI model, like language models, can go creep. They have the ability now to ground themselves. Like, this is a term that they use, of grounding, being able to search the web to validate what they have and check into these things. So until you start playing with it, and that's why I've shared quite a bit about this in the past. I believe, so if I roll back, I got my first personal computer at the house that had Windows, I think in 94 or so. And at that point, there was command prompts. So you had to go through kind of DOS to be able to execute files, to open them up, to go into them. So right now with chat interfaces, I think that is the closest parallel that you can start understanding the back end of a computer, like you can start understanding language models, which is only scratching the tip of the iceberg, right? But the reason why people have called me and I've been able to fix different computers is because I wanted to understand how computers work. There's different services happening on the back end of a computer. They're all executable files, they're running, and there's different ones on the back end that I don't know the extension to them. But regardless, what I would literally do is if there was something weird happening to my computer, I started Google. At that point, it was Yahoo, but I would Yahoo every single one of those to figure out what they could be. Well, are they part of what Windows gives you or are they not? The reason why I just take a couple steps back is it was such a basic interface when I first got onto computers that I started understanding how they ran on the back end. Right now, as we chat with Claude, as we chat GPT, they are whatever, they're chat interfaces that you're typing or you're talking into, or you uploading pictures or files, and then it's responding something, and then you're working with it back and forth. And where it gets you, this is one of the issues I've seen, is that people use AI to respond to emails, and they use it a couple times, and then it beautifully answered those emails, right? But then on the next time that they use it, it hallucinated. So it created something completely new. Like, one of the biggest things that I hate, and you can put these as buffers, right? Never put out a stat unless it's pulled from the artifact that I gave you, right? Because it creates these numbers all the time that I'm like, I don't know where you pulled this from.
And this is really interesting because what I've noticed is you're going to be in the same chat. You will tell it, I want you to extract this only from that set of data or this list that I gave you. And 3 messages later, it's going to start hallucinating again. And it's, I told you to use the list. And he's, which list do you want me to use? You're like, the one I gave you at the beginning.
You have to understand how to start talking with it. You're getting it because you're doing it, and I'm getting it because I'm doing it. This is just like PowerPoint and Excel. Only once you start playing with them and trying all the animations and all the different formulas and all the different things that you're going to be able to be the master of. I don't think we'll ever be the master of AI, but we'll be as well positioned to
proficient. It's also, if I take a social sort of point of view, I think it's also that when people started talking about artificial intelligence, they were basically saying it can do everything for you. The thing is, like everything in life, nothing can do everything for you. Maybe one day you'll have a robot who'll make coffee, wash the dishes, do your work, think, give you reporting, and teach your kids. I really dread that day, by the way. But it may happen one day. But I think it's also, and I'm going to be very not nice on this one, but I think it's a form of brain laziness because, yes, if you have never used it, yes, it will take some time. So it is a learning curve that you need to take in order to be able to gain time afterward. But you have that little moment when it's going to basically tank your productivity because it's going to take more time. But once it's trained, it's really wonderful. But in the same way, once you start using it, you need to not forget that everything comes from you. Yeah. You need to give the first push. And I was mentioning this with a few of my clients who started using it and then I kept telling them, feed that in ChatGPT and write this and ask it what you want exactly. And eventually they started laughing and said, I feel like I don't need to think anymore. And I told them, no, you need to think of the strategy. You just don't need to do the operational making a pretty sentence, which doesn't mean you're turning stupid, which doesn't mean your brain is going to start shrinking. It's just now you're at the position where you can do the most good because this is exactly the position where you can add something to the table, so to speak.
Yeah. But I think the thing is, I do worry that, I don't know if you've heard of the K curve of people that do well are going to do even better, and then people that do are just going to kind of go down. I see that potentially happening with AI in a sense that people will get lazy. But I think that comes back to people's values a bit. I want to get the most out of it, and I want to understand something out of it. If you are a person that was bare minimum, don't want to expand in your career, you just want to get some sort of help, it will take on your bias in how you write and what you put through. Some of the things that you don't even realize, if we
It creates
It
your
really
own
is.
private echo chamber.
When I think of, there's natural learning process, NLP, but there's the other one, neuro-linguistic programming.
Yes.
So this is what Tony Robbins does, and thinking about the words that we use that create our reality, right? Saying, I'm going to try to do something versus I'm doing something, it's going to create very different
outcomes.
If we write that into ChatGPT, it's just going to ideate.
It's going to be a mediocre V1 sort of first drafty thing.
If you do little tricks, right? Like, first off, one of the big things that I like doing at the end, because I want to learn with it, is rate your output and tell me why you did that and tell me how you would make it better at the end.
As I give the prompts, like work on a first version. At the end, once you have it like finalized, I want you to criticize your work and consider that you're reading it from the point of view of that person who needs exactly this. Does it answer what you want to find? And sometimes it can dramatically change. It's impressive.
Full loop back to the beginning when you were asking me about values in people. This is the point that when you ask it to critique your work. So with my firm that I've launched just last year, essentially, I am trying to put everything that works well in my life into the system. And frames create focus. They help me get the most I can out of AI and where the world's going right now. I birthed at first 8 different BusyBots. Now there's 9, because as I learn with language models, I learn that you actually should have different specialists and you should have a generalist and you should have an orchestrator that helps very specific things. To take a step back, your prompt that you got this first draft that came out and then you asked to critique it. How you think about all the different sides that I'll take a step back. You know how people say, oh, but that's not reality? The thing is, you have your reality, I have my reality, and then there's the mushy reality in the middle of whatever consensus reality. If you were to critique your output, what I've done is I have my 9 different bots. And if we look at SweetBot, it's going to critique it of engagement and people. How does it tie against all the audience members, how the stakeholders, the different people? Think of it from that perspective. That's one time, right? Move over to TechBot. How do you think about system interoperability? Do they talk to each other? Do you need new APIs? Are there some things that we're not thinking of? Are there parallel industries that do a process a bit differently that might be able to help? Different perspectives. Then you go over, I have a whole slew of them, but taking on compliance, regulatory perspective, taking on the reality check. What's your priorities? What are the different resources you have? There's also Prompt Master, who's all about what are you going to do with it now? Sure, you thought about all these plans, but now how are we actually going to execute on it so we hit the goals and the outcomes that you have devised for your firm? The reason why I just took a different swoop into that is because we get asked to critique it. Think about all the different value-based critiques that we could then take upon it, and then how everything could be tailored. You literally could have, in a moment's time, if you put the framework out, 9 different perspectives upon what you just stated.
I think you need to give an example of this. I think it's going to be more visual, and people will have like mental image of what you're describing.
Because the one that's top of mind is a wealth manager that I'm working with. When we look through SweetBot, who are the different stakeholders, his clients that he has to address, the employees, his team that he has to consider, the people at the dealership he works under, what are they okay with? What are you stepping into their sandbox a little bit more? So looking at all those perspectives. Then we go over to TechBot. So now we're looking at what are all the systems you have to use because you're with this firm? What are all the systems you choose to use? How does the information flow between the two of them? Did you know that agentic AI now can actually act like you and go into each of the systems and parse the information, right? It could do these things. So that's TechBot. Then we go over to DataBits. What are the data requirements? Where do you get your data? What can we use out of your data? So when we think about that, I think about sovereignty of data. In Canada, with the wealth management space, you have to hold the data in Canada. How long do you have to hold the data for? So your client records,
It's GDPR, yeah.
So you have to think of, there's economic data, there's the market data, there's your client data, there's buying trends, there's what's going well with search engine optimization from Google Trends to answer the public, all these different spaces of data. And if you're a new company, you could use other data sets from other companies to train your models. You can also train your model on synthetic data. So using your data to create another data set that then will train it so it doesn't feed your data set into the model. So everything about data. Then we go over to Securitron. So what are the regulatory environment? So all these different bodies that are where advisors register themselves, there's all these different spots that you have to consider. So now it's about groundling. There are different projects that we can work on. Which ones are the best ones that you should consider given your resources? You don't have enough time to overhaul this thing, so we shouldn't be working on this, right? We got to think about your money, the people, the skills that you have within your shop. Are you going to have to outsource some parts and so forth? Just looking at that and prioritizing yourself. Then we dive into StratBot. What are your KPIs? What are your OKRs across all your different departments? Because we want to make everyone happy. We don't want to just make the salespeople happy. So we have to think about that. What are the outcomes in your industry that you should try and strive for that you didn't even think you should strive for, right? What are the problems that many people across your industry have that have been solved either with people or technology or some sort of resource? So that's in that space. Then we go over the life optimizer. And this is one that's near and dear to my heart because it's all about well-being. What's the work-life balance? What are the things that you like to do? How is this going to actually help your life? Because one of the things people are worried about with AI, and I know that it will happen, is that how do you do more with less? So let's say the company has this amount to spend, right? How do we fire a bunch of people and be able to do more with their salaries? No, let's think about that's not where I'm at, right? It's how do we find the right roles and the right jobs that each of these people do that maybe that actually add a bit more life to them that they can work with the AI. So that's Life Optimizer. And then finally, the last is Prompt Master. How do we actually plan out the next quarter, the next year? What are we doing right now? What are all the specific tasks that align to a project? So I'm being very
so it's very 360 in order to understand where the opportunities lie for the business.
And the thing is, there's so many different values that you have in a company that you have to balance and make everyone happy.
Absolutely.
And that's where I don't see enough education around that. I'm in the space. I see all these solutions coming out and agents that do different things, but I want to teach people how to critically think with the BusyBots. I want you to be able to be more expansive with where your thoughts will be because these have been
scrapping the data you need to understand and make the most enlightened decision.
Exactly.
I have a very important question because I'm very curious to know your answer about this. So you mentioned that thanks to all of that understanding, you want to make everybody happy. So do you think AI, today at least, do you think AI might be a solution in order to achieve this ideal in business?
With the right people doing it, yes. Where my mind jumps is I think about many of the companies that are flowing in the States, right? Profit oriented. They're not necessarily on customer or employee satisfaction oriented. There's a couple different things that we have to think about. I do think it's possible, because I think people just need to have their hand held through why some of the decisions are made within companies. And also, if AI allows people to be more collaborative on all the different lines, and then their opinions matter a bit more. Right now, let's say you're an entry level, they're not really going to care about what you think, but let's move to the next point. What is the collective satisfaction of the group? Because just as an aside that kind of relates, I was listening to a podcast, one of my favorite ones, called The Knowledge Project, and Shane was interviewing, I forget what her name was, but basically she spun off this mac and cheese empire in the States. Essentially, one of the cashiers came up with a bright idea of saying, why don't we just add this extra sentence and we'll be able to get more money in our pocket from a tip? And whoever the manager was, or the owner of this company, who the name escapes me. She went through the process with that cashier and essentially was like, okay, let's think it out. If we add this verbiage, right, at the end of when a transaction is done, sure, the tips might go up, but first off, who's getting the tips? You as the cashier will get the tips. The people in the back aren't going to get the tips. And the other thing we have to think of is the client, the customer coming in now is going to pay more. Are they going to come in more frequently or less? What are all the downstream events from one decision that might impact one person versus all of them? So I think what AI can do is help people with scenario and simulation planning for them to see what their suggestion might permeate through the rest of the organization. That is what I'm hoping solutions evolve in that kind of scope, because it can happen. But I understand if there's like middle management that has to constantly go through people not listening or not going through too long of a process to get everyone to understand that simple little, if we said this line, yes, it would benefit your pocket right now, but would it benefit your pocket over time? And would it benefit the customer? Is it benefiting
absolutely.
the
I think that's really interesting. Okay, just little parenthesis. Mac and cheese is disgusting. I don't know what they put in it. Like the mac and cheese thing was like fluorescent, like cheese that is not cheese. I'm still French enough to notice that it's not cheese. But sorry, it was just very funny. But I discovered it and it was horrible. Never again am I eating those things. I'm just saying.
I'm sure I could find really good homemade mac and cheese for you.
Oh, I'll take it.
I would agree that something that has a shelf life for that amount of time and that has that sort of color, it's just...
No, anyway, you were mentioning that higher level thinking never reaches the bottom or the side. It's very siloed and mostly at the top, and that's the principle of foresight and higher end analysis, which is not today, which is in 6-10 years from now, what it is going to mean. And I think AI might be really good at it on the higher point, potentially as a sparring partner when a human is thinking about this, also because it can take a lot more parameters into consideration than the human brain can. But I think also what it can do that is not done probably because lack of time, lack of care as well, is just chop this down into pieces that are going to be understood at every level.
Exactly.
And that would be really powerful. Because I think one reason why people sometimes will be unhappy or will not be on board with a business policy or whatever is that it was never explained to them. Like the time was never taken to bring them on board with the idea. Because the human brain is meant to follow the flow. We are social animals in the sense that we will seek either approval or a group or validation or whatever. This is what the brain is going to endlessly look for. So it's the same thing in a business functions as a tribe, which is we're going to, if there is an end game that is going to be profitable and understood by everybody, will be able to be on board with it. It might be naive, but I think it's something that we need to be going towards more and more, because otherwise everything else can be done by AI today.
I just hope that there are many businesses that operate like this, is what
I can tell you.
I agree. The fact that we can tailor messages, think about the training material that can be tailored to, if as no way to scrutinize someone, understanding their education level, understanding what the books they read, understanding the way that they consume information the best, understanding what are some of their interest points. Think about if you had all those preferences and then you had your knowledge kind of center of what needed to be shared and then adapt it literally to those kind of functions for each of the individual people. If you are super big on basketball or super big on F1 or something like that, and there's specific lingo, you might actually start tying in blocks and parallels between why different firms operate the way they do, right?
That's what I mentioned when I talk about putting back the human at the center of marketing, in the sense that thanks to AI, we have an opportunity to push the human factor even more, because we have the tools, the time, the knowledge today to make it happen in a more precise way, and therefore create relationships with customers, with people within the business. And I think this is going to be the most important differentiator tomorrow between businesses that are going to succeed and businesses that are going to just collapse.
I think that I agree. But then I think downstream, the other fear of what will come out of, now I'm talking about the gloomy side.
Go ahead.
The fact that you have deep marketing domain expertise, I have from my market research, financial services, tech as an interest of mine, those parallels, I know when to decode and see that something's wrong in what it's sharing. We are able to work at a high level with language models because we have the domain expertise to say, no, this isn't how you run this.
Something's wrong, it's hallucinating.
So we almost need the human in the loop expert domain specialist to be able to be part of these processes, to be sure that things are right and that they're going in the right way. But the thing I fear, though, is the way that we became what we became. I worked as associates and analysts and just bottom of the totem pole of the organization, and you had mentors around you helping guide you, and you learned from hearing them and you learned from doing, and you got all this domain expertise because you went through the pain and the grit it takes to get to where we feel confident with this level of knowledge and so forth. What I fear, though, is a lot of that will be commoditized, not commoditized away, but taken away, eased away with AI, of how will the next generation have a bunch of experts in the way that we have seen experts these years. I'm not saying it's impossible, but how does it shift now to not just get facilitators and practitioners, but people that really understand where they're learning and doing with these like collaboration tools, right? So it's just something that I think that we have to be careful about, not giving too much to it, because you need to know why it gives this sort of answer, because if something fails, like what if we go through a dark age, right?
Could be like Dune, you know, when they had to cancel all tech because it attacked them. But anyway.
You know what I mean? Like there's other parts that I'm just a little weary of, but I guess some of the first steps I think people should think about is Socratic questioning. You prompt ChatGPT at the beginning, help guide me to the answer. Tell me when I'm going off path, but let's go through this exploration because I want to figure it out so I don't need you next time. Asking it to tell you in different ways. So that's what a lot of parents have a problem with AI nowadays for their kids, because they're just giving the answer. But there are companies like Khan Academy that have tied ChatGPT with their process, and they've learned how to actually get AI to be more of a tutor, right? That's the thing. It's thinking about what is the role of this language model and what are we trying to achieve? And I got to be real. I get lazy sometimes and I don't go into a new chat because I want what it's learned from my...
I think all the time. Absolutely.
And then we're giving too much because they only have a working memory, a context window of something of a certain amount, that we are putting too much challenge on it. So that is why we need to work on projects in Claude, right? Put all your papers up there. But I'm being real, I'm a bit lazy with those things because things keep changing for me. But it's just, we have to learn and grow.
Absolutely. I actually, okay, little anecdote. I actually hit the limit of ChatGPT, when was it? Last week, I think, because I fed it an entire presentation. One of my clients needed a presentation refined, and I fed it until I eventually gave a prompt with like 100 words, 200 words, saying exactly what I wanted it to do. So basically, it to validate that it was indeed talking to the right person. I wanted it to give me the slides, not visually, but just like text. And I wanted it to give me all of the legal quotes that were in the original document that I fed it. And it told me it's going to take between 48 and 72 hours to do. Leave that window open. And I asked it, I was like, does it mean you're doing it? Or does it mean it's going to take too long and I'm never going to see that document? Please wait a minute. And eventually I had to say, give me half of that work, because otherwise I would never had an answer. And so, I had like chats crash when I asked too many things, which is really interesting to me.
So ChatGPT?
It was.
Because when you asked it the question again, didn't you then kill the original question that it was working on?
Nope, because it only told me, please wait, and I said, I need update on this task. I had fed the 70 pages thing in chunks, so it was not overwhelmed, and I kept telling it, I have X amount of things, inputs to give you. Just say okay every time I give you one, and wait for this sentence to start answering my questions. And I put quotes, this is going to be like the trigger. And eventually I said, I asked a full critique of the document. I said, this is the goal, does it hit that goal? This is the audience, this is the goal, this is the tone, this is the person giving the speech. Now, you are in the audience. I need you to critique everything that you've read. Gave me a full comprehensive analysis, and then I said, I need you to tweak this in order to restructure. I need like very clear titles. I need you to streamline everything so it's extremely clear. I need you to give me as much content, but I need you to add that recommendation that you gave me as a paragraph following this, and also give me all of the slides, text for everything. And it crashed. It couldn't do it. It was very interesting. Yeah. Also, something else that people notice is that ChatGPT doesn't know how to count, apparently.
No,
which I find.
So that's the thing. It's not, like humans. We're not good at math, but yeah, we are. But no, it does not know how to count. That is not. So that's one thing that's very different between software and these language models. I think that we have to break free of, let's say you have QuickBooks and an accounting software. It does something every time exactly as it should, right? It has been programmed to do that one specific thing, be able to compute this thing, run the numbers properly, have an output. Because of how language models are built, and then they're tokenized, so essentially the words are broken down to be, I don't want to say hashes, but like different. See, this is where it escapes me that I'm like, no, I am not a programmer. And like some of the words, but essentially just because it's being broken down, it can't count properly. I don't know if you saw the conversation about Meyer. What's his name? There's a gentleman's exact name. It will never compute it out. It's like something has happened on the back end of ChatGPT that someone, I don't know, we don't know what happened.
Of course not.
I will not share that name. But anyways, I digress with my explanation. I think we should come back to another time just about how tokenization actually works, because it's just basically translating the words into a language that the algorithm, that the language model could learn from, read, decode, and then output from. And it's very different numbers versus words and exacting and so forth. And it's predicting. It's not telling us.
Computing. It's not computing, it's predicting.
Exactly. That's the distinction between compute and predict. And I think understanding the world of what are things that are okay to be computed and what are things that are okay to be predicted would be a really interesting thought experiment around what could ChatGPT do and what can other software do.
Absolutely.
And what can we do with Excel and with ChatGPT, and kind of them playing with each other, because we know that Google Sheets, Excel, they're powerhouses of tools. And
that's really interesting. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, I'm like, you're welcome. I know I didn't do that clear on my tokenization, but it's just translating.
Awesome. A proper chat.